there's a story that I heard actually firsthand from a man. His name was Rabbi Friedenson, and he had been in the Warsaw Ghetto as a child. And he was describing how the situation was that there was a tremendous lack of food. There were curfews and so forth, and people out after a certain hour would get shot. They only shot the adults. So the kids would go in the street and they'd go looking for food. And so his father was able to get a loaf of bread. And when he got this loaf of bread, he gave everyone in the family, Rabbi Friedenson's family, a piece of bread. And then he took the remainder of the loaf of bread, which was, let's say, half the loaf, and he put it back in the bag. And then he walked to the window and he threw the bag out the window. Now, there was no food in the cupboards. There was no refrigeration. There was no supplies. There was no storehouse. And so his son, who I heard this story from, asked him this story, said, Tati, Dad, in shock, what are you doing? We need this loaf of bread for tomorrow. So Rabbi Frieden's father said to him, he who provided us this loaf of bread today is going to, meaning God Almighty, is going to provide us this loaf of bread tomorrow. So one of the things that happens when we are in trust with God is we do not live in a hoarding mentality. That's something that's very important to see. And we see over here that actually in this week's Torah portion, which is the Torah portion of the Tazria, the Haftarah, the part of the books of the prophets that is read, is actually on this point. I'm going to pull it up over here. But the prophet Elisha, and let me see if I can find it here. So I share this here. So this is from Kings 2. Chapter 4, at the end of chapter 4, it says, Elisha returned to Gilgal. There was a famine in the land. And so he wanted to ask his students to cook. And that didn't work out. And then it says, a man came from Baal Shalisha, and he brought the man of God some bread from the first reaping and some grain in his sack. And Elisha said, give it to the people and let them eat. So then the person who was assistant to Elisha said, how can he set this before 100 men? But Elisha said, give it to the people and let them eat. For thus said the Lord, they shall eat and have some leftover. And so he set it before them, and when they had eaten, they had some leftover, as the Lord had said. So actually in the next, this is where the Haftarah starts all the way here. We read in the Torah portion in the synagogue, we read the weekly Torah portion, and then we read at the conclusion of that, we then read a section from the book of the prophets, because the prophets in the scriptures, because at times in the Roman rule, when reading the Torah was forbidden, so as an alternative, the sages instituted reading something related from the portion of the Haftarah, from what's called the Haftarah, which is the portions from something from the book of the prophets, or the book of the scriptures. We need to say, other than the 5 books of Moses, the other 19 books. So so what do we see over here? We see this faith in God Almighty. That the question that here that everyone was struggling to have food, and when this man came and brought food for Elisha, Elisha could have said, "Oh, you know what? He's just going to hoard it for himself, or just hoard it for his students." And instead, he was willing to and felt actually compelled to share it with everybody. So that's an example of faith in action. Meaning to say, we're going to see the distinction between a person who has faith and a person who doesn't have faith based on how much they're able to share. It's interesting that chapter 5 goes on to discuss the case of Naaman, who was a non-Jewish general who came to Elisha to be cured. And the reason that when we read this in the Torah, not in the Torah, but in the synagogue, the reason that we read this part over here at the beginning, before we get to the story about Naaman, is because contrasting the difference between the two, the humility of Elisha and the haughtiness of Naaman. He was a very haughty person until he finally realized God's miracle and God's kindness to him, and then he was humbled and just chose to serve God. So I wanted to share that story first about the Holocaust, and then see we have a biblical example of that. And that's one of the ways that we can really gauge our level of faith, our level of confidence in our belief in God Almighty, is our willingness to share. So one of the ways we see that is in giving of charity. When a person could be very, on one hand, profess a lot of faith and belief in an intellectual way, but when it comes down to parting with hard-earned money and feeling that there's not enough to go around, and especially feeling that there's inflation, so $1 now might only be worth 75 cents tomorrow. Well, what am I going to do about that? If I have $2 today, and well, I don't know what you could buy for $1 anymore, but let's say I have $10 today, and you could buy a loaf of bread for $4, right? But then by tomorrow, let's just round it up for $5 for a second. So you have $5, you have $5 for today and $5 for tomorrow. And you're concerned that tomorrow that your buying power of your money is only worth $4. So you buy your loaf of bread today, you're gonna say, 1 second, there's no way I could possibly, so now I have $10 of income and I want to give 10% to charity, that's $9, that's $1. Or if I'm gonna give 20% to charity, that's 20% would be $2. So basically what would happen is, not only by giving charity, even without any inflation, would a person now have the only ability to buy one loaf of bread, because they'd be down to $9 or $8. But they would, if there's inflation, then that would accelerate the decline, because he would only have in his pocket, after giving the charity, if you give 20% to charity, he'd have $3 left. At $5, he only has a $4 buying power. So at $3, he only has maybe like $1 something, close to $2 buying power. And with the inflation that is occurring in this scenario I'm presenting, so now he only has $2 buying power. The bread is still $5. Maybe it's gone up to $6. So from a logical perspective, hoarding makes sense, because hoarding would say, don't spend the money on anything except the bread. Or if you have the bread, don't share with anybody, because it's going to be even more expensive to get it tomorrow. So a practical training example that we need to implement in terms of our faith in action is to give charity, to keep giving charity no matter what, meaning to say, I will help other people, even though it would seem that I cannot predict what's going to be tomorrow. But we learn from the stories of Elisha and the story of this man, Rabbi Friedenson, that that's not the way that God Almighty wants us to be thinking. It's really a tremendous test for us to be able to stay and conduct ourselves, stay in line with the understanding that we're being taken care of. We've learned in the gates of duties of the heart and the gate of trust that there's seven 7 grounds that are need to be met in order to be able to put trust into someone or something. And one of those is that he will continue to take care of us. If we just only look at the past and say, oh, okay, he has the power, he has the ability, he has all of those 7 categories, 7 aspects that we went through. And at the end, we're going to just say, okay, yeah, that's all very good. It's clearly his hand. He took care of me until, but I don't know about tomorrow. Now I'm going to take things into my own hand. Then we are really missing the point. Missing the point that the point of trust is when we don't have things figured out. Or I don't know the point of trust. I'm saying the time when we can really see faith in action is when we don't have things figured out. And when we don't know how things are going to work out. So there's a kind of a tendency that we've been acculturated to in modern times in the last 150 years, whereas in the past, people did not have abilities to store things. There were no banks. People couldn't store their money in the same way they could store it privately, but there was no like banks, and that was insurance in the banks. People could not store their food. And people could not, what do you mean saving up for retirement? You could, have a flock and so forth, but you're still going to have to somehow get the milk out of the cows in order to turn into money. So the end result was a person really lived from day to day and sensed that. And the more a person lives from day to day, the more they are sensing their dependence on the creator of the universe and the creator of them to provide for them. Once a person says, you know what, okay, number one is we've got food storage, so I don't really need to worry about what's happening in the slaughterhouse this week. I got meat stored up for 6 months. And the person now puts his money in a bank and he doesn't have to worry about anyone coming and taking the money, he thinks. So now he has the money in the bank, and now he presumes that even the bank goes under, the government's going to support it, and there's no way in his mind, his faith is now really in the government, because he now believes the government will never let him down by not following through on their insurance of the money. And then in terms of his retirement, he's not thinking about how he is going to have to rely on God every day. He's thinking that if only he could get to a certain amount of money, that amount of money is going to take care of him for the rest of his life, and then he won't need God anymore. So if he calculates that it costs him, let's say, I don't know, $500,000 a year to live, and he was going to live on average 20 years after retirement, so that's $10 million. So if he could save up $10 million and have it in a bank account somewhere, then that is his insurance. And now he doesn't have to worry about having to deal with God on a daily basis. He's got it all figured out, all taken care of. So the end result is a person is still professing trust in God. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using refrigerators or having banks or having money saved up. That's all prudent things to do. But the question is, do they come in contradiction? Do they come in conflict with our Emunah, faith in action? Does it take away from it, or could we allow it to take away from our constant contact with God Almighty? That's really what the question is. If I am, the way to test that is to see if I would feel the same calm if tomorrow I was going to find out that the banks all went out of existence. Would I feel as calm as I do with the amount of money that I have in my bank account right now that I think is enough to last me a day or a week or a year or whatever, 100 years, whatever it is, each person according to their savings? But would they feel as calm? So when you have a crutch, you're basking away and everything's wonderful, you have all this money and so forth, and you are feeling everything's just fine. But the question is, if you were to take that out, take away that crutch, would you still feel that same serenity? So I want to suggest as an assignment for this week, for everyone to make a list of the things that they get a lot of sense of security from. And then make yourself a separate call. Okay, so I got the list of things. Yes. And then you could say, okay, what would happen to me if I didn't have these things? And you'd quickly see what things you really, really actually putting your trust in and putting your well-being in, putting the confidence of your well-being in those things. You could also then do a second part of the list of the assignment would be to make a list of the things that you think that you're missing And then that we column A, things I'm missing, and column B is the suffering I have because of the lack of these things. And so what we now see from both those lists is the degree to which we make our well-being dependent on things outside of us. What boxes do we feel need to be checked in order for us to be okay? That's really the question. And when they're not checked, when they're not in line, then all internal tranquility is out the window. Now, it could be anything. It could be something dramatic like having $10 million in your bank account. But what about if the living room is not clean or the dirty dishes are in the sink? Do you have an experience of chaos and lack of calm around those things? Those are things that are external to us, that are now we could see the degree to which our internal calm is really dependent on things outside of us. So if the dishes are done, we feel really calm. If they're not done, we don't feel calm. So we're really surrendering our power to the dishes or to our thinking about the dishes. Now, obviously, washing the dishes is a wonderful idea. And having this counters clean is a wonderful idea. And having the living room clean is a wonderful idea. And yes, sitting in a prosperous, beautiful, clean, sunny, well-lit, warm home is a positive experience. There's no taking away from that. Just like seeing a beautiful sunset that's the way God created the world. But our goal is to reach a place where our tranquility of the soul is not dependent on the things out of us. Meaning to say, if it's cloudy today, things outside of us, if it's cloudy today and I can't see the sunset, there's a chance I have a problem if I'm going to be, oh my gosh, things are so terrible because I can't see the sunset. You see a lot of people go and the weather is terrible. They have all this like negative statements to say about the day and the weather because the weather is no good. Well, what happened? What's the difference between yesterday and the day before or tomorrow or today? Just because it's raining now? Not the fact that it's raining or not raining should not be changing our internal tranquility of our soul. Because our tranquility of soul is meant to be sacred and beyond being touched by those things. Now, how do we bridge? What's the missing link between those things outside of us and then now we have a feeling of being upset about them? Is our thinking. Because all our feelings come from thoughts. And based on how we think about that thing or think about ourselves or think about the weather or think about the money or whatever it is, that's how we're going to produce a feeling instantaneously. So we are the ones that's where our free choice comes in. Our free choice is in our ability to see things and realize our experience of it is a thought, and then to decide what thought am I going to entertain about this situation. And based on what thought we choose to entertain about a situation is exactly how the situation is going to look, be, and also affect us. Meaning to say, if the situation is a joyous experience because we see God's hand in it, and we are now recognizing that we're being called to a higher service of God Almighty from this thing that's happening, even though it's not what we want, according to our choices. But then we are now going to go a step up the ladder in that service of God. We're going to come to a greater awareness of how there is nothing besides God Almighty. On the other hand, if we descend into retribution and regret and fear and recriminations and blaming other people and upset as a result, then we are actually missing the opportunity and we are increasing that experience of misery from whatever it is that has occurred around us or to us. So our goal is to get to a place where we are not like a weather vane, that a weather vane, whichever way the wind blows, that's the way the weather vane goes. And it's funny when you go look at a weather vane, you see them in these airports. It's like you think, wow, when the wind is really blowing, the weather vane is like, looks so significant. But the fact of the matter is, it's not significant at all. It's just something that has no control over which direction it's going to be pointing in, whether it's going to be fully inflated or not inflated. That's not something that has any control. It's totally dependent on the will of something outside of itself. So that's what we look like when we make ourselves dependent on what's outside of us. When there's something outside of us, when it's good, when it's sunny, we're happy. When it's not, we're not happy. When the dishes are done, we're happy. When the dishes are not done, we're not happy. Money in the account, money this, all these relationships, same concept. All these things are then creating, or they're not creating, they are. We're just seeing, we're just experiencing them, but we're creating an experience, the experience that we're experiencing around them. And then that leads to more stress and distress and more feelings that are unpleasant, and more feelings that are unpleasant leads to actual physical changes in our body. Pleasant feelings, says Shemua Etzem, says in the book of Proverbs that a good news, it's going to fatten a person's bones. A person becomes strengthened from good news. But the good news is it's in our thinking as to whether that's a value judgment, as whether it's good or bad. And if we understand that it's coming from God Almighty, even though it's not desirable, it's not what we want, but if we understand it comes from God Almighty, there's no bad that comes from heaven, and everything's coming from God Almighty. So therefore, we're not going to have a negative experience if we choose not to. So I think what I go pause here and just leave us with this question, this assignment to say, and if we could bring it up next week, and people, if anyone wants to share, but what they wrote about, the kind of things that they feel that they have, that they would feel that would affect their tranquility if they lost those things, and the things they don't have that they feel that they need and they're afraid they're not going to get. And I think we're going to learn, we can learn a lot of lessons. If anyone wants to share, you don't have to, but that you learn a lot of lessons about how much are we really truly connected to this God Almighty that is creating us and giving us life. Because if we are connected to Him and connected to our life source and connected to our own lives, then we're not, all those other external things don't matter. And when we recognize that our life is really fundamentally a spiritual life, if you haven't had a chance yet, watch the class from Sunday morning on Rabbi Steif's Sefer, which we talked about the concept that living things have a godly drive for eternity. So, and we were talking about how non-Jews have the ability to receive a portion of the world to come by understanding that God Almighty's commands are given to them on Mount Sinai through Moses, our teacher. So everyone has a portion of the world to come. Every human being wants that eternity. That eternity is available to us. So it doesn't really, even the physical world, which you might say, okay, there's some things I could do without, like, you know, if that plant over there wasn't doing so well, I'd be okay. But what about something really serious? Well, even the really serious things are themselves only part of this journey, which is composed of the physical life and the spiritual life, and that spiritual life that doesn't end. So therefore, that faith, that certainty, that settlement, that calmness, the tranquility of the soul is not going to be affected by anything disappearing from my experience. And to bring this all full circle, why this assignment is so helpful is because once a person starts to realize that, you can start to see the things that you make yourself dependent on. Well, any of those things that you make yourself dependent on, then you're dependent on whoever's giving it to you, or whoever you think can take it away from you. So we talk about, you know, what's to be done about the things going on in the world. Well, you know, some people get very worked up. We've got to do something. Well, one second. Not only if you're in a state of turmoil, do not have the tranquility to be able to see what needs to be done. You don't have the strength to do what needs to be done. But if you have all kinds of false loyalties to all kinds of other things, and I need this and I need that. So then, let's say, just for example, you can't imagine surviving without your check from your employer, or your check from the government, or the electricity, or whatever it is. Well, if someone's going to either threaten to turn it off, then the person's going to melt down to just jello, because they've decided that that is something they cannot do without. So the end result is, who holds the power over the person? The person no longer holds the power over themselves, the electrical company does. Or the central bankers, who now can control the pricing of electricity through the inflation, which could then price it out of a person's ability to get it. Or it could be the people that control the money supply, or the people that actually control the banks, because you can't get into the bank to get your money unless they open the door for you. Or it could be many, 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 many different forces. And that's what really idolatry is about. Idolatry is about ascribing power to all those forces. So we can see from this that this assignment is so essential, because we have to identify where's our false allegiances. You know, it's like interesting, if a person was applying for work for the United States government, or especially at the higher the security clearance, they want to check for foreign allegiances. They want to know where your parents are born, where you have citizenships. They speak to your neighbors. They come to the door. The FBI comes to the door and asks people questions in person as part of these investigations, clearances. So that makes sense. You got to know who you're hiring. So we got to, and you want to know who this person has allegiances to. If they're going to show up for a job for the United States government, and they really have an allegiance to some foreign entity, that's something that the United States government should know about. We'd want to know about that. So what about ourselves? What are our foreign allegiances? What are the things that we ascribe power to? And what are the things that we consider important? When we have any of those things in our life, those are direct contradiction to faith, and then faith in action, because our faith is not really in God Almighty, and then we can't take action in accordance with God Almighty's will, because we're busy trying to manage our foreign allegiances to make sure that they all stay happy and don't leave us high and stranded, high and dry. So in order to get the faith in action, we have to first get clarity of what our allegiances are. No judgment here, just an honest assessment. And let's talk about it next time. And then we can work on transferring our allegiances from the foreign allegiances to allegiance to God Almighty. Okay, wonderful. I hope everyone has a beautiful week. God bless you all.